Okay, welcome to Project Herpetoculture podcast, everyone. This is episode 21. And before I introduce our guests, I'm going to go through our standard housekeeping spiel and give Dylan at the Animals at Home Network a shout for hosting us on his platform.
Go.
And exactly.
Have to do it every
Also, also want to mention our sponsors. We have Custom Reptile Habitats, manufacturers of some of the best PVC reptile habitats out there. And we have an affiliate link posted in our show notes and description. If you make a purchase going through that link, we'll get a little kickback at no extra cost to you. We also have Cold Blooded Caffeine, purveyors of fine coffee. They've got some excellent single origin, some excellent roasts, some blends, and yeah, we have a little discount code posted in our show notes and description, and that'll also give us a little kickback there at no extra cost to you. And then the last one is Redline Shipping, who are quickly developing an outstanding reputation already, even so new on the scene. So check them out for your reptile shipping needs.
Heck yeah.
And one last little plug for our Patreon. So if you want to support the show, you don't want to do it by way of supporting our sponsors, you can support the show directly on Patreon. We really appreciate that. And we really have some serious ambitions for this show and want to grow it beyond just this digital platform into some, hopefully some in-person meetups and stuff like that down the road. And that's the best way to help us get there. So yeah, with all that being said, I guess I should probably introduce myself.
Oh yeah.
And my co-host, which
Who
I
are
forgot
you,
to
bro?
do. So my name is Roy Arthur Blodgett, and I'm joined as always by Mr. Philip Leitz of Arids Only. And today we're speaking with Morgan Palmer of Tierra Turtles. Welcome, Morgan.
Hey, what's up? What's up? How you guys doing?
Great,
Awesome.
man. It's great to have you. Yeah, so we've been acquainted for a little while now through the magic of Instagram, which is it's so great. It's been one of the ways that I feel like I've connected with a lot of folks. And yeah, you stand out as just someone who I really admire the way that you're approaching herpetoculture. And you're also, I feel, in this realm of herpetoculture, working primarily with chelonians that feels so foreign to me as someone who's never really kept chelonians. So I'm curious, just to begin, if you could kind of briefly describe your work, how you fit into herpetoculture, how you found yourself in the art and practice that we're all enamored with here.
Yeah, definitely. I guess I'll kind of start with my roots and just interest in reptiles and amphibians. It's kind of a similar story to a lot of people. I grew up in rural New Hampshire, which is an area that's pretty rich with a lot of different species of frogs and turtles and snakes, and they have everything. And I grew up kind of in a rural area, so there was a lot of wildlife and natural areas around my parents' house. So I grew up kind of exploring in the swamps and catching frogs and snakes and turtles and everything, and just kind of really got enamored with these animals and observing them. So I think my real start was in the wild, kind of observing them and seeing, oh my gosh, this is just a crazy diversity of all these creatures and just different habitats that they lived in. And then I think my foray into herpetoculture didn't start until I was probably 12 or 13. I had kind of always had an obsession with reptiles, and finally convinced my parents to let me get a pair of turtles. So I got two red-eared sliders that are a pretty common species, but they were maybe 2 inches long at the time, and I actually still have those two. They live with us on our sanctuary here. So yeah, and they've traveled across the country. Right now I'm based in Washington State, so kind of the totally opposite side of America.
Wow.
But yeah, and so it's been a real adventure, kind of going from a kid walking in the swamps to then getting a pair of turtles for the first time, and then now we're up to I think about 18 turtles. And
Wow.
we're also caring for several crested geckos too. That's kind of our other side that we don't share a lot about online, but they're in the background.
That's awesome. Wow. It's so I'm always jealous and or I don't know what the word would be. It's sort of a mixture of emotions around people I know who have still have their first reptile pet, right?
Yeah.
Because I sort of embarrassingly don't for various reasons, right? Like some of it has to do with just life circumstances. I mean, my very first reptile pet, I don't think survived very long, frankly. Um, because I think my first one was a salamander that I found in the backyard of my mom's house when I was like 4 years old. It was I was born in Connecticut. And when we lived there, I used to tromp around the backyard, flipping stones, looking for salamanders, and found a couple and brought them in. I'm sure they're not, or they didn't live very long, but I was a child. I'm sure my mom just let them go or something like that. But anyway, folks like yourself, my good friend Cam out in the Netherlands, he had he had a leopard gecko that had been his for forever. I don't know if it was his first lizard pet. I think it was. It was one of his early ones, and
Wow.
he had the thing for like 20 some years, which is just epic. I love it when people can have that kind of like dedication, especially from a young age, because I feel like when it happens at a young age, that's pretty damn remarkable. I feel like it's
Mhm.
quite rare for people to sort of see it through from young onward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of philosophy has definitely carried through to our work now for sure. Like I should give a shout out to my partner, Trini. She's the other half of Terra Turtles here, and
Yeah.
she is just as much a part of this too. But our philosophy is looking at all these animals as a lifetime commitment. So
Mhm.
getting my first turtles at 12, 13, turtles can live a long time. I mean, they can live 50 plus years. I
Yeah.
mean, there's species of tortoises that can live over 100 years.
Right.
And to be honest, we don't know how long they can live. A lot of species, we
Yeah.
have no idea. Um, so kind of, and I think my parents taught me that too, looking at it as a long-term commitment. And I think that's trickled through to everything that we do here, kind of looking at it in that way as a very serious commitment.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
excellent.
It's really amazing to me the longevity aspect of working with Chelonians in particular. I mean, we were just talking yesterday. We had recorded another podcast and we talked at length about just the longevity of different reptiles, but I mean, just particularly Chelonians are so well known for being so long lived. And that never, I mean, obviously I know that, but in terms of like how that relates to keeping them, but also to like studying them, I had never really deeply considered that until like last year. I did the master herpetologist certification program through the Amphibian Foundation,
Oh,
which
cool.
is just a really cool kind of online primer that you can go through, and they go through each family of reptiles. And it was really interesting, like in the lectures about turtles and tortoises, to hear just like how challenging it is to study them, because like people will dedicate their lives to studying them and then die, and like the turtles that they're studying are still alive.
Right.
They keep
Right.
going. And so there has to be almost like a culture of inheritance within the studying of them to keep these longitudinal things going. Otherwise it's just lost, because there's such long-lived animals. And I think about that, how it relates to herpetoculture. So I'm curious, like, yeah, how does that fit into like what you're doing, thinking about um these animals that could potentially even outlive you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Something that I've heard recently talked about, I can't remember if it was on this podcast or different, was about kind of the end of life planning, and
Mm-hmm.
for the human, because
Yeah.
if the animals do outlive you, what happens to them? So that's something we've started thinking about. Um, but up until kind of learning about that idea, definitely just thinking about long term, what's the plan for these animals? Like on our property, are we going to have to expand because they're going to, if we keep adding more turtles to the collection or to the group here, eventually we're going to run out of space, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they're going to live a long time, so you want to be prepared for that. So
Yeah.
that it definitely affects kind of the long term aspect of it, and kind of just thinking ahead to the future. it's kind of like you got to have one foot in the present and then like 10 in the future, because you got to just focus on that too.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. So could you speak a little bit to like how you're keeping them, like your kind of facility, so to speak, your grounds there? I know you do a bit of indoor, a bit of outdoor. What's your kind of philosophy of keeping as far as that goes?
Sure. Yeah. So our current property, we live in kind of a suburban area. So we have a typical like quarter acre lot, if you can picture that, with a typical house, 2-car garage type thing.
Mhm.
And we've dedicated about half of the backyard to outdoor pens. We have 2 large pens, and within each of them is a large pond too, that has a filtration system and pumps and all that. So I think combined it's probably about 1,000 square feet outside of like space.
Nice.
Mhm.
And then indoors we have, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 aquariums of different sizes. And I'm working on some new projects where I'm building sort of a rack system with for some of our semi-aquatic turtles, where half of it's an aquarium with filtration, and then the other half's land because they're
Mhm.
semi-aquatic. So yeah, we kind of have a mix of everything. I love keeping them outside because I think that's the most natural and most appropriate thing for turtles. You've probably heard before, but turtles need the UVB. Basically, it's required. If they
Mhm.
don't have it, then they can't synthesize calcium, and then their shells get soft, and they have all sorts of health issues. So
Mhm.
that's been a really crucial learning experience, that you need to provide it, and the easiest way to provide that is outside. But outside comes with a whole other host of issues that we're learning and still trying to troubleshoot. Most notably is that you have predators outside,
Yeah.
which you don't
Mhm.
have inside, hopefully. But
Yeah.
Unless you've got some house panthers like Phil.
yeah, you got rats or something in your house, that
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
work. But no, but we have we kept the group outside for about a year with no issues, and we had very very limited protection
Mhm.
installed. And it was very naive of us, but on one summer ago, we had a predator attack and actually ate one of our turtles, and
Mm.
injured 2 others, and one of them ended up losing a leg actually from that incident. So she's still alive and kicking, but that's the constant reminder that you need to be vigilant when keeping outdoors. And now we have a whole host of measures we're working on. I've
Mhm.
thought about putting up electric fence around the whole property, but that's just not realistic. We live in, like I said, a suburban area, and I would hate for
Yeah.
one of the neighbors to accidentally reach over and get zapped or something.
Yeah.
You know, do you happen to know what predator it was, or is that a mystery at this point?
I believe it was a possum, because the
Oh,
next night I was outside. We have 2 dogs, which do a very good job of scaring away most predators. And the
Mhm.
common predators, I should say, for turtles are raccoons and
mhm.
possums. Um,
Yeah.
you could have like maybe foxes, but they don't really get into the neighborhood area. Um,
Mhm.
and then from the air, actually, you could have birds too. So we've had a great blue heron actually land in one of our ponds and take a couple of our fish.
Right.
So that's a whole different strategy. Like
Yep.
keeping a mammal out is totally different than trying to keep a bird out.
Yeah.
Totally.
And
But yeah, we're pretty sure it was a possum at that occasion.
are there any
Mm.
other, so when I think of outdoor keeping, because this was actually going to be one of the things I wanted to chat with you more about, because I have a lot of friends who keep outdoors in various places here in the US. Usually with them it's lizards or tortoises. And I've wanted to try doing at least some, even just temporary outdoor housing to a certain extent, because at this point, I can get my animals sun during the summer, and I always do, and that's great. But actual housing outside, when I think about it, I'm thinking of weather, I'm thinking of predators, I'm thinking of theft, I'm thinking of external parasites, I'm thinking of internal parasites transferred from other outdoor animals, like even in my case at my shop, occasionally rodents pop in
Mm.
inside the shop. And so far, thankfully, they don't get in the cages, or they don't mess with the lizards. It doesn't seem to do anything. But are there any, do all of those concerns add up for you and your turtles, or are there some in there that you just don't have to worry about?
Yeah, those are definitely all concerns. I think that the biggest thing, the two biggest items, I think, are the weather and then the predators. In terms of the parasites, we haven't had to deal with that yet, and it just hasn't come up as an issue yet. It could evolve over time, but luckily we have enough space that the turtles are. It's actually amazing when you put them outside and you give them enough space, like they act totally different and than when they're inside.
Yeah.
So they have, unlimited hiding spaces that they can go and be apart, and they really don't interact much, except when there's a male that wants to mate with a female or something, and
Yeah.
you'll see that interaction. But like the females typically will stay apart, and they'll kind of do their own thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely the predators, and then the weather is a huge thing too. Here in Southwest Washington, it's a pretty mild climate in the sense that it doesn't get that cold. But we're learning. This past winter, we unfortunately lost 2 turtles. We think potentially brumation issue related, but we're not 100% sure. But anyways, the issue with the winter here is that it's long and it's dark. So we get a lot of rain, we get a lot of clouds. It may not get that cold, but like say compared to the Midwest or the East Coast where these turtles are native to, there's times when it gets into the 70s and sunny in the winter, and that doesn't really happen here. So there they might have a chance to get out and bask and maybe find some food, because they will come up and go back down throughout the winter.
Yeah.
But here they kind of just have to hunker down for 4 or 5, 6 months. So my kind of thought is, that maybe it's not perfectly ideal climate here. So we need to do some modifications kind of to make it work. But we have had 5 different individuals successfully brumate here. So I think that tells us something, but then losing 2, I think, was kind of it set us back a little bit in our theory that the climate was adequate. But so we've got to kind of address that, I think.
I mean, I guess it's still technically possible, right? That it wasn't to do with the climate. Could it have been something unrelated to that?
It could, and that's actually a really good point that I should make about a lot of the turtles that we care for are they come from a variety of different sources. They're not healthy captive bred animals. So our kind of niche in this game, I guess, is that we try to focus on turtles that are kind of at the end of their life and sort of or elderly or adult turtles that are kind of either unwanted or just the owners can no longer care for them. So that's how we've acquired most of the turtles in our care right now. So we don't really know, their history. We don't know, were they neglected for years and fed a poor diet and full of sickness?
Yeah,
it's hard to know.
Yeah.
And that's kind of another challenge of, combining that with keeping outdoors is like, it's kind of the perfect mix of like, there's almost too many variables.
Yeah.
Right, totally.
But I would imagine, I'm sure like as time goes along and you have more and more of your own animals that have hatched with you and are being raised in those conditions, you probably see, I bet you see like no problem at all. I tend to think of, actually, I shouldn't say too much because I have no idea, but I wanted to actually just kind of circle back to something you were talking about with brumation, because this is something I think about a lot. Like, how we talk about certain species of reptiles as really, like some of them are just highly adaptable and highly flexible. So some of those animals lend themselves to captivity more, right? I'm wondering wondering how weird and nuanced and semi-complicated like true scientific brumation methods could get, because you mentioned that some of these turtles that you're working with in the Midwest might have a 70-degree day kind of in the middle of the winter, where they could come out, eat, move around, defecate, who knows, do whatever they're going to do. And I think about this sometimes with the Uromastyx because it's winter here now, right? Obviously it's December. Everybody here is pissed. Like 75% of the Euros are under in hides, and I'm not going to see them for a long time. Some of them are still coming out. Oddly enough, I had a pair mate today that I put together just because I like to throw them together during the winter, and one of my Moroccan pairs mated, and I was like, okay, you guys are off, but all right, whatever. And it's totally weird. But my whole point in mentioning this is, I think about going out to the American Southwest sometimes during the winter, and you can go out there and it's the same kind of thing. Some of those animals, the chucks, the collards, some of those things will pop out in the middle of December when there's a day that's especially warm. And some of the animals here don't really do that. Some of them either don't go to, they never come out at all, or some of them never go down all the way at all. And I wonder if there's probably some flexibility in how they can go through these winter cycles, right? Like, I'm sure that there's probably a pretty wide range of what would fill or fit as all of this within these two bounds is totally normal winter behavior for species X, species Y, species Z. I don't know, just sort of I don't know, sort of thought I was thinking about it with regard to how complicated it could get, if you really break down, just because of the variety of so many things that we all work with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and one of the resources that we use to kind of judge if a species is going to be potentially, acceptable to brumate here is looking at kind of there's the USDA has plant zone maps that you can pick up online, and it basically tells you the average, I think it's the average minimum winter temperature. And that's used for planting, horticultural, different tropical plants and things. They can tell, oh, they're going to die at this point because it gets too cold. So using that and kind of overlapping that with like a species range map, you can kind of get an idea of, okay, here's kind of a typical winter. Now there's obviously extremes, but on the average winter, so we right here in Southwest Washington, we're on zone 8A, which is, I think, 20 degrees Fahrenheit is the minimum average temperature. And that's pretty accurate. Since I've been living out here for 6 years now, I think, and I've really only seen it dip below 20 like a handful of times. So it's a pretty accurate gauge and a tool that I think is useful. Yeah. But yeah, there's definitely variation. And, a species such as like the eastern box turtle that we care for, I mean, they range from Maine to Florida, essentially. So that's a huge range. And you don't know, the individual that you're dealing with, are they from Maine, or are they from Georgia, or are they from somewhere in between?
Wow. Yeah, that's wild. There was, I don't know if I've mentioned this story before, but one time I went to Arizona in early March, like just outside of Phoenix, like early March. And we went looking for chuckwallas because we thought, we could just go poke around. It's real early, but who knows? It'd be fun to go just herping anyway, just to see what's about. There were some mornings where it was like 49 degrees, 52 degrees, like pretty damn cold. And we would go out, and the chucks from the day before hadn't moved from where they were, like today, they were the same, they were in the same place. And it was just a rock crevice sitting out on the side of a hill. That chuckwalla got cold as hell. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And I think about that kind of thing all the time because, obviously I'm not going to do that to mine in captivity. It doesn't mean it wouldn't be good for them in some ways, but that's that's actually a really clever tool. I never thought about using.
I like that too.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. How did you find out about that? Was that something you were kind of peripherally aware of already, or did somebody tip you off to it, or were you like, oh, maybe I can find, how did that happen?
Well, yeah, so one of my side interests, I guess, is I'm really into plants and just, landscaping and farming and just kind of learning about, how agriculture and horticulture works. So I think I probably came across that tool back in college or something, and realized, hey, wait, this could be there's definitely something useful here. I mean, there's been a lot of climatological data that's been analyzed to figure this out. So there's value in that. There's also, if you want to go on a more local level, I think it's NOAA maintains databases of a lot of weather stations around the country, and you can look like not just airports, but like there could be like micro weather stations like even closer to you, and you can get kind of an even closer idea of, okay, this is how the temperatures work. And sometimes they measure precipitation too. That's a useful tool to see how wet is it, how dry, because you don't want them to get too dry or too wet.
Right.
If you're keeping a species that's not native, it's definitely a lot easy, or I would imagine, I don't have any right now, but I would imagine it's easier to care for a species that's more native to your area because
Yeah.
they've obviously evolved to that climate.
Right. Right. For
Right,
sure.
exactly.
This is a total tangent, but I'm just curious. You mentioned being into plants and horticulture and farming and whatnot. Are you ever you into truffles at all by chance? Just I know that
I
sounds random, but
I am, but I've never looked for them or tried to, yeah,
there's this
harvest.
there's this really great book I read recently called The Truffle Hound by Rowan Jacobson.
Mm.
It's a totally he's like a reporter for Outside Magazine or something like that, but just totally random. If that kind of thing interests you, it's actually a fascinating read. It's really fucking cool, super strange. And for a very brief, for like 24-hour period after I finished the book, I was like harassing my fiance with like, maybe when we get in a house, we can try to put some truffles in the ground. We could do it. We could manage some truffles. All we have to do is just like take about a truckload of limes and throw it all over the whole dirt and let it sink in and mix it up. I mean, it was a fascinating book. I know it's random, but you should check it out if that kind of thing intrigues you.
I will check it out. Yeah, I'm always interested in learning about, yeah, just any type of wildlife or plants
Yeah.
or fungi or whatever.
Yeah, same. Yeah, same. And that one, that one really got to me. It's such a because he kind of so it's like a multifaceted thing. He talks about truffling and specifically like in Spain, or I mean not Spain, but like Italy and France, like the truffle trade there. And then he finds out, oh, turns out there's truffle. They're finding truffles in like Eastern Europe, and oh, turns out there's truffles in North America too, and it's like this kind of ever evolving, really interesting thing. He gets into truffle farming. He talks about the dogs, the Legato Romagnolo, which are the breed of dogs that specifically are bred to find truffles. Like that's their whole
Wow.
scene, right? It's it is really remarkable. I found it super fascinating. It kind of right up there with like if you read any of the famous herp books like The Lizard King or Stolen World,
Hmm.
or if you read The Feather Thief by chance.
Hmm.
Oh, I
Um,
haven't.
oh man, oh my God, that's another good one. That's even better almost. So the Feather Thief is really sick because it's about a dude who he's like I believe he's a musician at like Juilliard, if I'm not mistaken. And
Mm.
he also gets into fly fishing or fly tying rather, just like artful, high level fly tying. And to make a long story short, he basically breaks into the British Museum to steal feathers to tie to sell and to tie flies. And like he genuinely steals some of the feathers that were brought back by like Darwin
Oh my
and
God.
shit. What's his contemporary? The one who
Oh gosh, I can't remember either right now.
oh my God, I can't believe I feel like I'm embarrassed that I can't remember this other gentleman's
I
name.
know I am too. I have
Famous.
to.
I can't remember it.
I have to.
The other famous
The
evolutionary
forgotten evolutionary biology.
biology.
I have to
Yeah.
point this out. Darwin contemporaries. I apologize. Oh,
Alfred Russel Wallace. Yeah.
Alfred Russel Wallace. Duh.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. Anyway, this kid steals flowers that Alfred Russel Wallace and Darwin had personally brought back to the British Museum, and
Oh my God.
he gets in all kinds of trouble for it. And it's right. This one, the Truffle Hound is kind of like right up there with intrigue and layers and narrative, and it's beautiful. Also, there's one more before I know it's just such a major tangent, but everyone who's listening should read these books because they're fucking good books. They're really good. Is The Dragon Behind the Glass? You guys
Ooh,
familiar with that one? That
no.
one, that one's specifically about the arowana, like the fish,
Mm,
you know,
hmm.
Oh,
and it's it actually has a lot of, from my reading, felt like I was reading a book about herpetoculture too, because there's all this illicit trade with arowana. There's issues with like you know having a when you ban keeping of certain stuff, then you create a black market for it. But then also when you like legalize certain trades, and you create a legal market for it, and there's still incentive there. And talks about Asia and how all over Asia, the arowana is like the biggest fish in the trade. It's like the most popular thing. Some of those damn fish go for tens of thousands of dollars, obviously up like huge sums of money for these wacky fish, just these incredible fish. So I feel like Amazon right now, if you liked Stolen World and Lizard King, you'll love, you know.
Oh, that sounds really interesting. I'll have to check those out.
We should actually do just a books episode of Project Herpetoculture and just geek out about all the books that we like related to this general field of ours.
That's a great idea.
That would actually be a fucking epic time. I would love to do that. Jesus Christ. That actually gets me psyched. Okay. We're going to table that, have that as an idea. I apologize for derailing the conversation, but we were talking about you using that USDA tool to find temperatures and in plant maps and range maps and stuff like that. That was cool. Sorry for taking us away for a second, but it was worth it. I thought
it was definitely worth it. I have something I'm kind of curious about, which is, so you said you're primarily kind of taking in animals that are kind of nearing the end of their life. It sounds kind of like almost like a rescue kind of operation on some level. But I'm curious if there's any, do you have any focus on producing anything, like breeding anything, or is it exclusively just focused on welfare, husbandry, enjoying the animals in that state? Like what are your kind of like, I guess, goals for Tierra turtles?
That's a great question too. So yeah, like I said, our niche is definitely more on the rescue side of things. Like that's where we're interested in, giving these turtles that maybe don't have a home, giving them a good home, trying to help them live as naturally a life as possible for the remainder of their life. And like I said, we've got, I'd say, probably 70% of the turtles in our care are rescue situations like that, where it's, someone just can't take care of them anymore, needs to find them a new home. We've also developed a relationship with a really good, like 501c3 rescue in Washington State. I'll give a shout out to Therese. She's up at Northwest Tortoise, and she does a lot of work with the tortoises. And I don't know how she does it. She really cares for the turtles and the tortoises and takes in so many, I don't know, countless sulcatas and redfoots and, some species that get large. And and she also takes in a lot of box turtles, which are more of a smaller species, and that's a lot of what we're caring for, our box turtles. So we've kind of developed a good relationship with her, and she sent us a few individuals at this point, and we give them a good home and try to integrate them into the group if we can. And but to answer your question about like the producing side, we're really not. That's not really something that we're trying to do on a large scale. I'm definitely interested in kind of the scientific side of it, like seeing how to do it. So we actually did hatch a couple turtles a couple years ago, but we don't have any plans on selling them or rehoming them. It was kind of an experience to be able to see the full life cycle. So, we have some videos actually up on our Instagram of their mom, laying the eggs outdoors in the enclosure, and digging up the eggs, bringing them inside, incubating them for like 70 days. It might have even been longer than that, and then they hatch out, and it's just the most amazing thing. Like you guys know, because you've hatched a lot of different critters, but it's just an amazing feeling. I had no idea that's
like it.
I saw those pictures. Really, absolutely adorable. So then, if they're outdoors in larger groups, so then are none of them capable of reproducing outside on their own, like without you, or are they? And are you mitigating that, or how's that all going?
Yeah, so luckily, so far we've caught I don't know actually, but I'm pretty sure we've caught every nest that has been laid. And the reason is that we use video cameras to help detect predators and potentially intruders too. But it's amazing; those things will you can pick up a turtle nesting on those. So we've had those out, and we've been able to capture that. And I'm also out there every day, and my partner Trini's out there every day in the summer during the peak of nesting season. And like this past summer, we had a different turtle. She laid a clutch, I think, of 4 eggs. None of them ended up being fertile, but we still tried to incubate them just to see what would happen. But yeah, from that first clutch, we were able to hatch 2 out of 5. And this was one of the rescue turtles that we have no idea, her background, and chances are she was probably having some issues before then. So it's probably why the hatch rate was so low. But like I said, we're not trying to produce them for the market or for other people. It's kind of more of just a home education experience. And now we're raising those 2 that we hatched. We're raising them up. We recently posted some photos of the naturalistic vivarium that we built for them, and it's just amazing. Like, we were keeping them in a more of aquatic setup that's been kind of shared by Chris Leone from Garden State Tortoise. He's kind of been pushing this aquatic setup for hatchling box turtles.
Yeah,
because they need really high humidity. And in the wild, I don't know, there's not a lot of information about them in the wild. So my thought is that they're very cryptic, or they are living somewhere that we have no idea that they're there.
right.
And I don't know. My theory is that they're living in like marginal wetland areas. Like, they're probably living in like really wet, swampy areas. And that's not at all where the adults live. The adults typically live in like more upland, forested areas. So anyway, so this rearing method is keep them basically in water, and then they're at 100% humidity. Their shells are growing really great, and we finally, after about a year, we transitioned them to this more terrestrial setup. But they're just loving it. They're exploring around, catching isopods and different food items they can find. It's just so fun.
That's great.
I love that.
Yeah.
I really I think it's refreshing to hear someone who's like heavily invested, in keeping reptiles and amphibians, but not solely focused on breeding as like the pinnacle achievement. I think that there's a way in which like the kind of the dominant like story within herpetoculture is that like the people who like know what they're doing, or like the people who are highly accomplished are only breeding. Like that's like what they're doing. And I think that there's other things that are worthwhile in exploring in keeping reptiles and amphibians. That doesn't necessarily have to just be producing them, in captivity. And yeah, so it's kind of refreshing. I'm curious if like that was like was that like a really thought out and intentional process. And like I know that particularly with Chileans, there's also just a lot of issues with producing high volumes of species that are actually not necessarily the most suitable for most people. I think of like sulcatas as a perfect example. You see these produced in huge numbers, and it's a pretty rare person that can actually provide what an adult sulcata tortoise needs, and so I'm curious just like what your process was to come to that orientation that you have.
Yeah, definitely. So it definitely comes back to that whole thing I was talking about earlier about the lifetime commitment aspect of it. When we're thinking like we're going to be caring for this animal for the rest of its life, and for box turtles especially, they can live 100 years plus easily. So we got to have space for that. So it's kind of a more realistic thing. Like, we can't be producing all these animals because we're going to run out of space even faster. And also, kind of like what you said, there's definitely a flooding in the market of certain species that are totally, in my opinion, totally inadequate as a pet. Like, almost 99% of people are not going to be able to care for a lot of the species that are commonly kept. The red-eared slider, for example, is another one that they can get up to like a foot long, and that's massive. And the reality is, no matter what you hear online, you can't keep them in an aquarium. It's just not suitable. Like, they're way too big for that. They need to be kept outside. They need to have access to land and water. And that's what we're trying to do here, is kind of give them the both aspects of our husbandry. But yeah, I think it definitely just goes back to that philosophy, trying to think of it as a lifetime commitment, and not trying to oversaturate the market with animals that may not be able to be cared for their whole life.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it seems like
it's kind of a shame. I don't know. I think it's a shame to see so many sulcatas being produced because, and I don't have any experience with sulcatas. This is just my own kind of perception of it. But yeah, they're just, they get too big. They're very destructive. They dig massive burrows. They're from Africa, so they live in huge, expansive areas that they probably have huge home ranges that, you know, who knows how square miles maybe. I mean, they could be moving so far. So they're not used to being constrained to, you know, 4 walls in captivity. And unfortunately, yeah, they're a very popular pet because they're really cute. And, you know,
oh yeah,
like a lot of animals, you know, people see the cute little baby and they're like, oh my goodness, you know, I want this in my life. And I didn't realize that it's going to get that big and, you know, do those things.
and then you see that meme of the sulcata just like smashing through the drywall, you know,
Yeah.
through the bathroom. Like somebody's just like, oh, I'm just gonna put this tortoise in my bathroom, and then like,
Oh,
not gonna stay
Well,
in there.
not gonna hold it. Yeah,
yeah.
this is something I've been thinking a lot about lately because there's such a weird there's like kind of a strange conflict in some ways between even my own views on this sort of thing because you know, on the one hand, I very much feel like people should be allowed to keep whatever they want to keep, right? Like if you want to get a retic or a black throat monitor or like a damn huge reptile, you want a croc or a caiman or some kind of whatever, I feel like you should have the right to do it, obviously within constraints. You know, we've talked about this before, which is, you know, you can't just buy a horse and put it in your backyard, right? You need to have, there's some regulation around this. And at the same time, it's kind of a concern because if they're going to be available at all, then there has to be at least some kind of market for them in the first place in order for people to actually produce them in any meaningful way, right? And yet, it is true that there are so many people who simply can't adequately care for some of these animals. And I don't know if the answer is like, well, some of them, you know, I think I think at the end of the day, maybe some of them just won't be. I mean, I don't know. I have no idea where I'm going with this. It's just sort of like something that I think about a lot because I don't want them to be available to people as imports. I want them to be available to people as captive bred offspring, right? And in order for people to do it in a way that is sustainable, then conceivably they've got to make some money off of what they're doing, even if it's not their full-time job, right? And so how do you feel? It's just such a conflict, right? Because how do you have to be able to, even with dogs, right? Like how many dog breeds are sustained by people whose full-time job is dog breeding? It's probably a lot, honestly. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like it's probably less common for any breed to be sustained by backyard breeders or someone who's just like, you know, I really like pugs and I'm going to breed a pair of pugs one day, you know, like that's not what's keeping a breed going. What's keeping a breed going is someone really dedicating themselves to an individual breed or an individual, you know, some sort of type of dog or cat or chicken or whatever. And if we're going to have the same thing in reptiles, you know, that's kind of what I want to do, right? Like I want to dedicate myself. I have dedicated myself to Uromastyx, Xenogama, now some Conyxis, which is so fucking exciting. But like at the same time, it's like, how do you make sure that you can sustain yourself while also ensuring that if you're working with an animal that is especially difficult to properly care for, how do you ensure that those animals are going to be properly cared for? You know, yeah.
No, that is a really interesting kind of dilemma. You know, it's like, and it kind of makes me think of, you know, what's the role of like kind of a governing body in this situation? Because with other species, say like for mammals or something, you know, the average person can't go out and just buy a monkey from the pet store, right? And I don't know if you guys have ever anymore, right? So
yeah.
We kind of learned as a society, you know, there's certain species that are more suitable for human companionship.
Yeah.
And there's others. I don't know if you guys have ever looked at like your state's prohibited species list, but
Yeah.
most states will have a list that, you know, it's amazing. I haven't even heard of half of these species. There's werewolves and different crazy animals that are out there that are like, I didn't know it existed.
Yeah.
So, but like, you know, there's thousands or hundreds of, you know, mammal species, probably not thousands, but maybe hundreds of species that are regulated. And, you know, to be honest, I think that that's probably a good thing. Like, I don't think the average person needs to have, you know, a lemur in their backyard.
Sure.
So, but I think reptiles are kind of the last frontier in a way. Like, it's the last major group of, like, you know, larger animals that we're getting into as a society, as humans. And, you know, maybe we just haven't figured out which species are suitable or not.
Right. Actually, yeah, this is actually super sorry, Roy, I don't mean to cut you off there.
No, go ahead.
I'm fascinated by this because, you know, we've had conversations with so many different folks now, and I mean, it's still a nascent, you know, young show, and I feel like one of the things I like about doing this podcast is I feel like my views and thoughts and concepts around what we do and why we do it and all these other things, they're evolving at this really rapid pace, because I feel like everyone who comes on makes super cogent points, you know? And, you know, I kind of feel like I've had this sense for a long time, Morgan, which is like, it's very likely that at least I think that the future of herpetoculture looks much more interesting, but much narrower in terms of scope, you know? Like, and I don't necessarily want that to be the case. Like, I'm not saying I want fewer reptiles in captivity, but I do think that there might be trade-offs with regard to like which ones are best suited for it, as we just talked about. You know, this is one of the reasons that I've recently, over the last 3-4 years, put a lot more effort into the Xenogama taylori, because they're tiny. They're that fucking big. They're perfect. They're a great little pet, super easy to care for even people who are dumb, you know, like no offense to dummies out there.
They're
like,
not listening to this podcast.
Yeah, they're not. Yeah, hey, it's fine. But I'm just saying, like, it doesn't take much space, time, energy, etc., to properly care for a Xenogama. You don't need that much space, right? Whereas an Egyptian Euromastix needs a lot of space, man, like a lot. It's a big animal, and I don't, you know, and so I don't know. Sometimes, at least personally, I tend to come down on the side of like, I don't know that every single species that comes through needs to be established. You know, like maybe there is a good reason. Maybe there's probably very good, like biological reasons why, if we're going to domesticate a large number of reptiles and amphibians, that we should, maybe the best case scenario is to do a lot of them. Maybe, I don't know, but I kind of feel like, I don't know. I feel like if we're gonna say that we're on the cusp of this new industry, which is herpetoculture, which is domesticated reptiles and amphibians, and I don't want people to freak out when I say domesticated, because I don't mean chihuahuas. I mean like just companions, right? It's going to look so different. It's not going to look the same way that dogs, cats, chickens, horses, pigs, cows, it's not going to look the same way, because they're not serving the same purpose for us. We're not like extracting energy from those animals, right? We're really, it's like psychic energy. We're harvesting psychic energy from our reptiles in some regards. So it's, you know, we're not going to be selectively breeding them for maximum output and meat development on their body, right? We're keeping them because it's like, well, shit, I really like spotted turtles, so just going to have like the coolest looking spotted turtles and the coolest looking diamondback terrapins and the coolest looking Connexus speckii, right? It's like there's, and so I guess I'm just saying, like, I don't know. I feel like in some regard, the future of herpetoculture, maybe it's the kind of thing that none of us really have any idea of what it's going to look like. Maybe in 100 years, it's like almost unrecognizable to folks like us, right? Yeah, I don't know.
Like for other groups of animals, I mean, like, yeah, it just seems like the future is narrowing, right? Like, And the mammals, you know, there's only a certain number that you can get at a pet store. You can get a
Right.
hamster, you can get a mouse, you know, a guinea
Mhm.
pig, right?
Fill up.
But you can't get, you know, every species. So my kind of, if I was, you know, trying to predict the future, I feel like it's probably going to narrow down. And in a sense, we kind of already are narrowing, or there's, I guess the masses are kind of narrowing. You know, there's
Yeah.
certain species that are very, very popular, and probably for good reason, probably because they're more suitable for care, like, you know, the bearded dragons or crested geckos or something that are relatively small in the grand scheme of things. But I don't know. I imagine it's probably going to narrow down. It would
Yeah.
be interesting to kind of time travel back to, like, you know, when the carp were being
Yeah.
cared for, turned into koi or goldfish. Like,
Yeah.
what were they experimenting with, all, you know, hundreds of different species of fish, and they just landed on that one? Or,
Right.
you know, how did that happen? I don't know.
Or the bonsai
Yeah.
tree, right? Same kind of thing. Was it just one ancestor bonsai, or was it a bunch? You know,
Mhm.
and I mean, this is one of the reasons why I kind of I deviate with some of the more I'm gonna mess with vocabulary here, so bear with me, folks. Like, this is where I really deviate from some of the more puritanical naturalistic keepers, right? The ones that the wild type is the best, and that's the pinnacle of the entire thing, and this is the only way we can go. I deviate right here because if we're gonna say, okay, so if I have to make that choice, I don't think that we can, I don't think it's sustainable to go forward and have every kind of reptile in captivity. Do I
Mhm.
think we're at the end of I think we'll still probably see new kinds of captive reptiles and amphibians for a long time. But if we're going to say that maybe it will narrow and therefore we're going to have fewer options, fewer total number of species to work with. Okay, well then in my mind, now it justifies morphotypes, right? Because now, you know, we don't just have wolf dogs, Roy. We have wolf dogs and Shar-Peis and Bichon Frises and golden retrievers and Chihuahuas and Great Danes. And now I'm not, obviously there's problems there too, because all various dog breeds have their concerns and things like that. But it's also I feel like, I mean, it would almost have to happen, because if I had to make the choice between no reptile trade at all and a minimal reptile trade with a great diversity of phenotypes, I'm going to pick that minimal trade with a great diversity of phenotypes. Now, would I obviously, in a perfect world, in an ideal world, I'd love it if thousands of species were available in captivity in some ethical manner, in a way that everything's captive bred, and maybe there's lots of preservation involved, and I mean, maybe some kind of weird utopic herpetocultural futuristic vision. But like, uh yeah, I guess I just kind of feel like my hunch tells me, my gut feels like it's probably going to go the way that we were just talking about, which is probably narrow. And if it goes narrow, you're going to have some variety in there. Otherwise, is it going to survive? Like, can we just expect people to want to have the same looking lizards and snakes and frogs for the rest of eternity? Maybe. I don't know. I really, I don't have any idea what that looks like. Or holy crap, I feel like I'm getting a little weird here. I'm getting a little down a bit of a philosophical rabbit hole. I don't know.
So you mentioned something that's interesting that maybe we could expand on a little bit, but you said, you know, these animals aren't fulfilling the same purpose as, say, a dog or, say, a cow or a rabbit or something. Like, a lot of mammals that humans care for are used for food or for working for us or for companionship. And I feel like reptiles are kind of more definitely on the companionship side of things. Like, they're not doing anything specifically for us. They're not performing another job.
Yeah.
Their job, or I was actually thinking about this the other day. I'm like, what is their job? What are they doing for me? Like, well, what they're doing is they're keeping me connected to the natural world. They're keeping me interested and engaged and learning. And I feel like if I didn't have them, I wouldn't be as engaged. I'd be kind of a disengaged, you know, someone who lives in an urban environment, very
Mhm.
disengaged from the natural world. So I think that that's kind of what they do for me. I'm sure it's different for everybody, but it's a very different use in the broadest sense of the word. But it's a different use than, say, if I, than my dog, or
Yeah,
than a cow or something that I'm raising for food. So
totally. Yeah, super different, and that's kind of why I wonder about it. That's kind of one of the reasons I think about what we do is like the beginning of domestication, right? Or at least like the very early footsteps in some way, because it's like, yeah, it's a totally different, yeah, if we're, again, use case, right? To steal a term from tech and all that crap. It's like a different use case altogether. And I kind of like that. I feel like I'm pretty intrigued by that concept, by the idea that like there's something else, because I think this might be a path that leads to like a true justification for what we do, like one of the things we've talked about across the whole length of the show has been, like, why do we do this and what's it for? And like we've talked about the inadequacies of like the don't tread on me, mindset, which is like, because I can, motherfucker, get out of my way. Like, and I kind of get that too in some regard, right? But I feel like, if I was someone who was breeding wolves, I'd be like, well, and somebody came up to me like, why the hell are you doing this? It's like, well, first of all, they're cute as hell. Second of all, they hunt with me and we share the meat. So I feel like I'm eating better than you, like, so whatever, there's justification there. And then with chickens, it's like, well, why the hell do you keep these damn birds? It's like, well, those ones lay eggs every day and I eat them. So it's cool. And also they're real funny. Have you heard them cluck? It's great. Fun. Or a horse in that case. It's like, well, what the hell? Why are you keeping a horse? And it's like, well, they're really friendly and they're totally spiritual. And have you tried riding one and shooting arrows off the back of it? It's fucking dope, man. You know what I'm saying? But with our reptiles and our amphibians, it's not the same thing. It's a totally different feeling. It's like, but all of us are obviously getting something out of it. And if I were going to argue from a highly theoretical biological perspective, they're getting something out of it too, which is survival and food and resources and mates. It's just not like wild evolution. It's confined evolution, right?
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I've been feeling really like I want to lean into this philosophical side of herpetoculture a lot more, like a lot more. And I don't know, I feel like some of that came out of our conversation that we had with Philippe de Beaujolais, which was like when he told us that the ancient Egyptians were raising crocodiles. I was just like, what? Oh, yeah. What? Okay, I get it now. So in other words, there is a gene in here somewhere for this. That's why, like, it's not just me. Everybody did it, I don't know.
Well, that's actually a funny example, because I was just thinking there's a species that actually does kind of serve a use, and it's a group of species, but geckos in like, tropical areas, they live in people's houses and they, eat bugs and spiders. So, there is an actual, use that they're performing for the people. It's kind of like a dog or something that's helping you hunt for food.
Oh, strong point. Yeah, I hadn't thought of. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that. That's a really good point. Yeah. Oh,
yeah, you definitely lean into the philosophical stuff. I think about it a lot. I just, because part of me really loves what we do, and then part of me feels very guilty about it. To be honest, like I feel guilty about keeping these animals sometimes, and that's part of ways into our philosophy too, of trying to give them as big and as spacious and as naturalistic as possible, because then that kind of, it combines the negative side of captivity, that they don't have free range of movement as they would in the wild, but then they're getting stable food supply, they're getting protection from predators,
right?
They're getting health check-ins. If they get sick, they get a vet trip.
Yeah.
They're getting something out of the deal, and it's not just a one-sided transaction for me.
Totally. Yeah, it's not at all. Like, it's also freedom from predators. Like, I'm not going to have to evade a fucking hawk ever again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I'm not going to have a coyote come in or a jackal come in and snatch me out of the crevice of a rock. and by the tail or something and bite my skull or whatever. It's like, it's not going to happen. It's yeah, it's definitely not a one-sided trade-off. That's a really, really good point. But also it's, it's that saying, I think it's kind of in vogue right now, but that there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs kind of thing.
Mm.
I
Mhm.
really enjoy that saying, that concept. And I feel like, because yeah, okay, I'm gonna pause there. I'm gonna actually gather some thoughts before I keep going, because now I feel like it's getting away from me a little bit,
Well, I feel like that. What you just said in that, I think is, I don't know what both of you have just been speaking to. I've just been kind of been listening here. I haven't been doing much speaking, but I think that like we've spoken in the past to like the value of the kind of conflict, within herpetoculture around that, or the conflict within the notion of keeping animals in captivity at all. And I think in some ways also, I think they're kind of like reflecting back to us like our own domestication and the ways in which we've placed ourselves into captivity within modern civilization of a kind, like we're not living in this harmonious balance, in direct relationship with what sustains us in the way our ancestors did,
Yeah.
and in the way that our animals would be doing, if they were still in their native ranges, right? And I think that in some ways, like even just like that exposure to that like thought experiment has value in the world that we're living in.
Right.
Because I think that like it's just something that people like we don't think about, like we don't have a cause to think about it a lot of the time, in our, especially in our busy lives, hustling to pay the bills and do all of that. I think that there's merit, yeah, to being exposed to these things, to being exposed to these kinds of things that are causing us to have these thoughts. Consider our own origins. Consider like how consider like what we've lost. What are the trade-offs that we have made to live the lives we do now, leaving
Yeah.
those origins behind? Because there are trade-offs. I think it's really easy to think of like human civilization as like this like um linear trajectory, like progress arc that we're just like slowly climbing and like improving as we go. And yet like what is the cost of our progress, and there's this amazing essay that I really love. It's kind of like a foundational essay, I think, within kind of like the environmental movement and kind of like environmental philosophy, but it's in Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold, and the essay is called Escudilla. And it's about the killing of the last grizzly bear in Arizona.
Mm.
And Arizona, or grizzlies, used to inhabit pretty much all of the western states. And people, nowadays we think of grizzlies and like as being synonymous with like Montana and Wyoming and Idaho and these like mountain, the Rocky Mountains, and they're actually like historically were like a lowland, like plains species. And this whole essay is about basically how, at that time, there were government funded trappers
Mhm.
who they'd basically show up, in your rural outpost and be like, is there any problem wildlife you need taken care of? And in this area on this mountain, Escudilla is the name of the mountain. There was this last grizzly bear that everyone knew about, and every year it would come down and it would take one cow and it would go back up to the mountain. And it's just like this heartbreaking account of the killing of the bear. And the kind of final outcome of it is like, it's basically posing that question of like, what is the actual true cost of our progress? And kind of one of the things that Aldo Leopold writes in the end of it is like, now when you look at Escudilla, the mountain, you no longer think of bear. It's just a mountain. And like there's something lost in like the actual spirit of the mountain itself by the loss of that animal, you know, and its presence. And so I don't know, that was like a very going into the philosophy, going into the tangents, you know, that was a kind of a deep dive there. But
lean in, baby. Get
I
it.
feel like it does tie back to herpetoculture, because I think again it is a way in which like seeing these creatures that are they're so ancient, you know, in their forms and their morphology and their physiology, and so alien in some ways to our own experiences,
Yeah.
and yet and so synonymous with the wild, you know, so synonymous with like just different far-flung regions, you know. It's like if like there are certain things I sent Phil an image recently of one of these gonocephalus species, this really obscure one, and it's just like, you know, it's like if you saw this thing out of context, you'd just be like, this comes from the gnarliest jungle somewhere, you know. Like you would just be like, where is this thing from, you know? It's there's just so much wonder in that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah, that's really deep. You know, I like what you that story that you told about the grizzly bear, because I feel like that's been, maybe it's an American thing or maybe it's
Mhm.
everywhere, but that kind of the philosophy that we should, you know, kill or exterminate every wild beast that lives in the land and build our cities and, you know, get everything out of it. Like it's just going to be people and our
Mhm.
stuff and our commerce. But herpetoculture is kind of, it's kind of a big like fu to that philosophy. It says, hey, wait, I'm going to take the weirdest looking creatures and I'm going to bring them into my house and I'm going to share
Yeah.
food with them and I'm going to keep them warm and I'm going to show them love and compassion. And it's kind of it's an fu to that other philosophy that nature doesn't belong in the city, or it doesn't
Yeah.
belong in our civilization.
or,
Right.
and yeah, absolutely. It's also yeah, it flies right in the face also of the idea that we don't that won't matter, right? Like if you know,
Mhm.
I hear, like, for example, okay, so there's I'm sure you guys have heard of this idea of we could very easily like eradicate mosquitoes from the earth, because and it would be like a net good, because you know, like millions of people die from malaria unnecessarily, and it's like the you know, mosquito borne illnesses and problems and parasites are just like the
Mhm.
scourge on the planet that we just like don't need. And you know, it's just like everybody, you know, at least the way I've heard this phrased is like everybody agrees that this would be a good thing. And it's like, yeah, but
Mhm.
who cares? Like, why? What makes you think? I've actually, you know, and I spent some time kind of being kind of on board with that concept for a little while, because the way I heard about it the first time was a fairly compelling perspective. But just the idea that it won't matter, or that it won't, you know, that it won't make a massive impact, and maybe it won't. Like, obviously, it might not. Like, it may be that we could eradicate the mosquito from the planet, and like, hey, you know what, turns out it's actually kind of nice, like I like being able to go, actually kind of tight. That could be right. Or it could be that that's like a really bad idea, you know. And
I mean, yeah, I tend to guess more the latter. I
sure.
wonder about like what is the actual biomass of all the mosquitoes on the planet? I
Yeah.
bet you it is staggering. You know, like isn't there
Yeah.
like something about like the biomass of like ants or something is like comparable to human beings on the planet or greater than human beings on
Way
the planet?
more.
Way
Way
more. Yeah.
more. Yes.
I wonder if it's a similar thing, you know, to like with mosquitoes and these other things. And it's like, well, you just lose that kind of biomass from the planet immediately, like you're going to impact everything that's eating it, because
Right.
there's a lot of stuff eating that.
Right.
Um, and I don't know. I think that there is something though about this. It's like what you're saying, Morgan, of like it flies in the face of that. It's also like it also kind of flies in the face of the whole notion that like we don't receive any benefit from interacting with these wild things. I mean, and like it's a perfect example of like with like our reptiles. Very oftentimes our reptiles aren't even friendly. You know,
Right, right, right.
very often, very often we're like dutifully, you know, devotedly serving these animals that are like tail whipping us in the face any chance they get, you know, and trying to take a finger off if they can, you know. But but we get something from it, you know, and I think that it is often, it's really hard to actually, but it's part of the reason why we ask this question, you know, at the end of every episode of why herpetoculture. It's like because it's actually hard to pin down
Yeah.
why we do it. Why does this appeal to us so much, you know? Like I can't, of course I have all kinds of things like I can say and have said about it, about its merits, but could I pinpoint like the core, you know, motivation behind it, the core meaning behind it for me? I don't even know if I can for myself. And
Yeah.
I think that that's, but again, I think that that's part of the value of it is like it proves that you know, we benefit from interacting with creatures unlike ourselves, and creatures unlike ourselves that may even be mysterious or dangerous in some cases.
Mm.
Um,
Well, and then, you know, another aspect of it is, you know, we're spending a lot of money and time doing this. Like, you know,
mhm.
I could save so much money and go on so many more trips and have a nicer car. And, you know, if I didn't have reptiles, I would be a richer man. And
You're
I would have
telling
so
Yeah,
much time
totally.
too. I would be so time rich and money rich.
Yeah.
Um, but so obviously there's some intangible benefit from it. And I also struggle to answer that question too. It's like,
Mhm.
you know, when people say, well, why do you have a bunch of turtles in your backyard? It's like, I don't know.
uh,
Yeah, it's
you should be next time. Just be like, I eat them. You know.
like
Yeah. No,
just
really.
throw a
And
curveball out there. Oh, they're delicious. Have you never had turtle?
Yeah. Haven't you had turtle soup? It's wonderful. But no, well, so there's also something you mentioned there, Roy, which is like the the I feel like also all of our definitions and rationales for what we do, or at least from my perspective anyway, it's always changing all the time,
Yeah, of
all the
course.
fucking time. Like
Yeah.
I feel like I I truly don't think. Sometimes I think about this all the time. I think about this a lot. So if I could go back in time to myself at 23 or even 25, I'm 35 and I'm going to be 36 in January. Jesus Christ. But that's crazy. It's not even that old, but the amount that I've changed in my life is pretty surreal. So like, even if I go back to 27 years old, I, I don't think I would recognize myself at all. Like in the other direction. Like if you know, if I met 27-year-old me and was like, oh, hey, just so you know, by the time you're my age, you're going to have like almost two sleeves. You're going to be engaged. You're going to have like a facility full of weird lizards, and you're going to watch them have sex all the time. You know, you know what I mean? It's like you're going to watch them hatch out of eggs, and you're going to like, oh, and by the way, you're also going to spend about 30 hours a week teaching people how to choke each other unconscious. I, I don't, I think I would have been like, what in the fuck are you talking about? Who are you? You know, what
Yeah.
happened? What happened?
Yeah.
But I feel, I feel as though the way it's the same thing with jujitsu. The reasons that I train jujitsu and the reasons I love practicing jujitsu now, after 16 years of training, are not the same as when they were 5 years into training. And it's the same thing with herpetoculture. Like the things, the first time I hatched Euromastix thomasi, I almost shit my pants. I was like, holy shit. Like, oh my God, these things are hatching in my house. Like, what? Whoa. Like, it just blew my mind.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, I'm still floored and psyched every time I hatch a Euromastix, but it's not that. It's very different
Mhm.
now.
Mhm.
And I'm happy. I'm super psyched that the why is changing, and like the because it feels like spiritual calibration, like you know what I mean, like I'm just gonna tweak and twist and turn and tune it until okay, we're there, all right, yeah, I feel like most aligned now, and then in 6 weeks I'm gonna have to turn this way a little bit more because now I'm more aligned this way, and I'm back this way a little bit more, maybe way more, I don't know. And I think it's really, I'm happy for that. Like, I'm not sure I would feel as secure in what I was doing if like the same reason it would be completely unjustifiable for me to say like, well, the reason I got an iguana when I was 6 years old is because I really wanted one. Well, if that was still my like my guiding ethos, I would probably need to go to therapy, like I mean, at least I think so, right? I don't know. Is that off? Is that
It's
weird?
probably safe to say. It's probably
Yeah,
safe to
I
say.
think
That's totally accurate. Yeah. Your
yeah,
12-year-old self or your 6-year-old self has totally different
Still running the
values.
show.
yeah, totally different structure, and
I
yeah,
I feel like this also just like what you're describing. I really relate to it, and I feel like it also speaks. It reminds me of what Philippe was saying about how one of the benefits of herpetoculture, the values of it, is that it's an interdisciplinary field.
Hmm.
And I think that's part of it. That's part of why I think it the reasons can change, and why it can remain so compelling, so endlessly compelling for those of us who have the bug,
Mhm.
is because there's just there's so many different angles you can take to look at it, and there are so many different fields within it that you can learn, and each one of them is deep, is a deep craft. And yeah, so I think that it just creates a lot of like breadth to the experience
Mm.
that allows it to remain compelling and allows it to be flexible to our changing selves. And yeah, I don't know, it just came to mind what you
Yeah,
said there.
yeah. No, I dig that. I really
Yeah.
do.
Well, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead,
I
Morgan.
was just going to say, I totally agree about the interdisciplinary part of it. I personally pull from a lot of different fields when I'm, thinking about stuff like, keeping turtles is, also you kind of have to have a foot in the aquaculture, filtration,
Yeah.
water
Right.
chemistry side, and keeping them outside. I've got to think about plants and how different plants grow and how to create habitat, using plants to create habitat. And even like, I'm learning different construction methods, like how to build things, because, I could go out and buy an enclosure, but why not build it for myself? So it's, that's
Yeah.
fun too. So it's incorporating all these different areas into the same purpose and the same mission, but yeah, pulling from different crafts, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Well, this kind of segues a little bit into something I'm curious about, which is just what's the status on this Mesoamerican biotope
Oh
project that
yeah,
you
yeah,
posted about a while back, and curious to hear about that.
yeah. So I posted. It's probably been a couple months now, but I posted a screenshot of one of my journals that I kind of sketched some ideas in. But
Yeah.
the basic concept is, this semi-aquatic enclosure. I mentioned it earlier, but it's
Yeah.
for a pair of Central American wood turtles. They come from Costa Rica, Nicaragua kind of area.
Hmm.
Um, and the idea was kind of, yeah, giving them a space for each area. And there's also some species of fish that are native to that area that we actually also care for. And I thought, okay, well, why don't I throw them in there? And then come to find out, as I'm doing research, I'm finding all these different species of plants that I am also a huge plant guy too. So I've got a bunch of different
Yeah.
philodendrons and different species that I'm putting them in there. So I'm like,
Cool.
I'm just going to make this kind of pseudo biotope. It's not going to be, locale specific, but it's going to be the general, Central America, Mesoamerican um, idea.
Hmm.
But the status is that it's probably about half built. I recently got married, so that took a lot of my attention. So I haven't had as much
Congratulations.
time to focus on. Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I haven't had as much time to focus on the enclosure, but I'm building it it's a wood frame, and then I'm using insulation panels and coroplast are my like siding basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also, this is a real experimental project, and I really like to build stuff. So I honestly won't have a problem if like next year I look at it and I'm like, I totally want to redo this thing because I learned so much and I want to just tweak it and do something different.
Cool.
But
Yeah, totally.
this idea is in the land area. I'm using hydroponics grow trays as the base, which is going to collect all the water, and they're actually designed to flow to one side. So you drill the
Right.
drain into the hydroponic tray, and the plastic shelf is actually pitched, perfectly graded so that it goes over to that drain.
Ah,
So the idea is that there's going to be basically a box out of coroplast, which is you can get at Home Depot or anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
The double wall that's like plastic cardboard. Um, the wall is going to be like that. There's going to be a glass sliding track door, viewing area in the front, and then the land area will be planted with a bunch of native tropical plants. And I'll probably figure out how to build some like terrain, so having one area being like way higher, because they're pretty active turtles, so they'll climb up and crawl over logs and things. So they'll have the high area, they'll have the water, they'll have maybe a burrow or some area they can hide. Um, so it's still a work in progress. I really can't wait to share, because I think it's
Yeah.
going to be pretty cool when it's done.
Yeah, I love doing projects like that. That sounds so fun. And it's just like, yeah, I feel daunted by the thought of like trying to do something like for semi-aquatic species like that and having the whole water feature, but I feel like that's something I want to brave someday. So I'm excited to see how it goes and like just yeah, be along for the ride a little bit.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
feel.
definitely the
Oh,
water
sorry.
features definitely make it 10 times harder, because you're not only worried about, well, you're worried about drainage always, because you don't want to have
Of
like
course.
stagnant, and then you have to worry about filtration, because most people, myself included, don't want to be like draining tubs all the time, like with fill and drain type system. You want to have the water have some amount of like residence time, so that it's more natural. You can keep the pH and everything's pretty stable. So I'm actually experimenting with a new filtration method for this. It's they use them in the aquascaping hobby. It's called a Matten filter, but
Mm.
Mm.
basically it's a big sponge, and you put an airlift behind it, and it sucks the water using the air as kind of a siphon. It sucks water through the
Oh
sponge.
yeah.
And has an insane amount of surface area that bacteria live on, and they eat all of the nitrates and different compounds in the
Right.
water. So it's a whole other realm that I think I mentioned earlier. We have a few aquariums too, so I've got some different fish that I enjoy, and
Nice.
it it's just another aspect of the hobby.
Are there ways in which your aquaculture practice like bleeds over into the herpetoculture practice? I mean, obviously you were just talking about that, right? That's one example, but are there other ways? Has there been anything? I mean, it could be anything, but I'm just curious if there are other ways that it kind of knits together with herpetoculture in any way.
Yeah, I think the biggest kind of overlap what occurred a couple years ago when I built my first pond. So, or my first real pond. I had built a pond at my parents' house, which is basically like a plastic, PVC liner.
Mhm.
Fill it up with water, put the turtles in, you're good. But the issue was always filtration. Like it would get stagnant, gross, algae, so you'd have to drain it, fill it back up. It's just terrible. But a couple years ago, I discovered this company that they're called Aquascape. They make it's basically a system. It's not just like a pond. It's the whole system. So there's the filtration, the pumping, the piping, the liner, which actually holds the water. And I think I encountered this through, they have a YouTube channel, so I saw a video. But they have this whole system. I'm like, okay, what if I apply that to turtles? Well, it turns out people have already done it. So like, there's some famous YouTubers that have had Aquascape come to their house and build ponds for them.
Wow.
But the ponds are designed for typically fish, so koi and goldfish, and they have different requirements than say a turtle. So what we add on is we have to add fencing around the whole thing. With fish, you don't have to fence them in because they can't walk, as far as I know. But the turtles can, so you got to fence them in. And well,
Yet.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, they
Just
haven't
can't walk
evolved to have
yet.
it.
Yeah.
But yeah, with the turtles, you want to keep them safe and want to keep them from getting out into the wild. So building fencing around it. So I think, the pond building has definitely been the biggest overlap between herpetoculture and kind of aquaculture, water gardening.
Yeah. That's cool. Wow. How interesting. Yeah, that's been one of the other things I'm curious to talk about with various people is like the ways in which sort of adjacent practice influences herpetoculture, especially because there are so many of these other fields like aquaculture or aviculture or, you name it, that have so many similarities or so many of the same like sort of constraining factors and resource factors that we have to talk about and think about, but they've been doing it for a lot longer than us, or maybe have more refined concepts about how things are done. I think all the time about saltwater reef aquariums. My mother had a huge one for a long time. She maintained it's like a 300-gallon custom acrylic
Wow.
water reef community tank for a long time. And I remember thinking, like, just imagine if keeping a bearded dragon was this complicated, it just was like, oh my God, we would have never gotten off the ground,
Yeah.
it's wild to think about.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But there's technology that they've developed that I feel is useful for this too. I mean, they have insanely complex lighting systems and filtration systems. I mean, I feel like in herpetoculture, we really haven't, in terms of water, we've figured out filtration because we have aquaculture too. But like, what about air filtration? Like, what about the
Yeah.
stagnant air that's in our terrariums? We might get to the point where we want to actually filter that and make it refresh. And, a lot of people use ventilation fans and things, but what if we want to, create some sort of circulation system that purifies the air? And, there's other industries or other hobbies that have explored these issues before, and I think we can learn a lot from them.
Yeah.
One of the ones
Yeah.
that I'm thinking my next enclosure build is going to be for our crested geckos. But the thing I want to try is I want to try building out of aluminum extrusion piping, tubing, I guess. There's a company that makes these connectors that you can connect this aluminum tubing to, and I think some of the enclosure manufacturers are starting to use it. But aluminum's super lightweight; it's pretty strong.
Yep.
And if you can buy it in bulk and buy it in different lengths, so you can make kind of any size enclosure you can add. So I'm hoping to build a massive, like floor to ceiling style crested gecko forest floor enclosure type thing.
Sick.
That'd be awesome.
That sounds so fun. Yeah, I've like fantasized on the show many times about the day when I don't have to buy 7 lights to put on one enclosure, the day when I can get one fucking bulb and it does everything, right? It does sunrise, sunset, UVA, UVB, the whole visual spectrum, bright white quality light, very resilient piece of equipment. It'll cost me $500, I'm sure, per bulb, I don't care. And it's on a track. So it tracks across the sky and then that track rotates, right? So you can I just can't wait. I'll probably have, I hope it's coming anyway. It would be a bummer if that never happened, but
civilization may collapse before that
yeah. At the end of the day, I might as well just put them outside. I think about that.
It is definitely interesting to see, what are the capabilities of our scientific understanding? Like, could we develop this product that would act as an all-in-one heat, light, UVB, infrared, any wavelength of light?
Yeah.
I think it could probably be done. There's definitely the components out there. It's just how do you combine them into a
right.
Totally.
I keep feeling, because I feel as though, in some ways I enjoy it's fun to follow the progress in reptile lighting, and the research going into that and the development going into that is really entertaining. And a lot of it goes over my head personally, right? But I can't help but feel sometimes as though like I'm using pagers right now. You know what I mean? Like the lights I have are pagers. I'm like, I don't want a pager. I want a fucking iPhone. God damn it. Or whatever. It's weird. I don't know if I'll live to see that or not, because it depends on how many brilliant people decide to go into reptile lighting, right? Which I don't know. I have no idea. There's a lot of brilliant people in it now. I can only hope that more will continue to do so, but I don't know. It's just a sort of an interesting thing I sort of fantasize about sometimes. This is, God, speaking of tangents, I had a really weird dream one time where I went into what I came to realize was my apartment somewhere in the world, and there were there were all these cages that were like uh mostly small terrariums, but a few huge ones, and they were like fully real, like just, it wasn't even like fake, it wasn't like some bioactive setup or whatever. It was like, okay, this looks like Oman. Like, this is the dirt from Oman. You know what I mean? Like, in my head, it was like, oh, that's the dirt from Oman, the sand and gravel from Oman. And it was like lit by these, it was these little tiny, they looked like a little drone, like a little coin that was just moving around on top of the enclosure. And it was like blasting this bright sunlight, but it was only like that far away from the surface of the cake or the surface of the stone and stuff. It was so weird. And I was like, this is ridiculous. And they were filled with animals that were like almost real, like quasi real, but they weren't like real things, like they were like stuff that I had, some my subconscious had put together out of like an octopus and a bearded dragon. I don't know. It was some random, it was crazy.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah. So anyway, that's totally unrelated. No one was
That's how
going
products are born. You have a vision and
to.
you're the one to develop it.
Yeah. I'm gonna. Oh no! Don't put that on me, man. Because then I might.
We should have another episode that's just weird dreams we've had seeded by herpetoculture.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, man.
I'm sure we've all got them. I can't really think of any off the top of my head right now, but I know that there's some back there that would come to the fore eventually.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, another, I guess, side tangent inspiration would be like the dart frog community. I feel like
I was just thinking of them.
They're almost to the level of like reef keeping, and the fact that they can like create this miniature little ecosystem that, and it's spacious, it's huge, for the animals that they're caring for, like, just massive. And it's harder to do with larger animals, but I think there's something we can learn from that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've said this. This is another thing I think I've said before on the show, which is that so I was trained. I went to college for art and design. I was trained as an illustrator, and I worked in concept art and design for quite a few years. It was just doing visual pre-production for games and film and all that stuff. So I worked at this studio out in Berlin, and coming from that background, and looking at enclosure design in herpetoculture, I was always like, this is so fucking uncreative. Like, it's just everyone is using a box. It's just a box. That's it. Just a box. I mean, and again, I'm not suggesting people have like those hamster tube homes for their lizards. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. But even just the way the interior space is utilized, the surrounding space around the box that we're keeping stuff in is utilized, the way lighting is utilized, the way ventilation is utilized. I mean, it just feels, I don't want to sound disparaging, but it just seems profoundly uncreative sometimes, at least sometimes, right? There's someone just said, Roy, I think it was you, or maybe it was Dylan, who sent me a link to, I think it's Variance Designs on Instagram, I think. And holy crap, like the most beautiful enclosures I have ever seen. I think they were sharing some exhibit terrariums that they built for like the Smithsonian Museum or something like that. I don't want to, I feel like I'm going to give them an incorrect shout out or something like that. I'm pretty sure it's Variance Designs. I might be wrong, but unbelievable. Like, and I saw some of that and I was like, okay, now we're cooking with gas. Like this is so interesting. Granted,
Mm-hmm.
boxes, it's still like the space inside is used in such a way that it's like, oh, hot damn, this is next level. This is what I'm talking about, you know? Um,
I feel
Yeah,
like, yeah, I feel like the dart frog community is probably what comes closest to that kind of, I like in situ ecosystems comes to mind, this kind of newer vivarium designer manufacturer that they are selling like kind of like what you're describing for aquascape. They're actually selling a system,
oh
so
wow.
they're selling it with the lighting rig. It has a ventilation system. Like the floor of the vivarium is at a pitch for drainage.
Mm.
It's just in like I remember when these first came out, seeing them and just being like, oh wow, yeah, like they actually thought about this.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
someone thought this through.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's like really cool to see that kind of stuff emerging. I mean, those are definitely very catered toward the dart frog hobby, but like the same tech, the same ideas can be applied to broader herpetoculture, and I think that um that's definitely kind of like where I draw a lot of inspiration with the style of stuff that I'm keeping. And um I don't know, it makes me like the more and more that I go, I want to just make everything myself,
Mhm.
and just because it's part of it also is like what Morgan you were speaking to, just like the experience of it. It's just fun, it's fun to DIY it. I made the vivarium for my sister's pet Malagasy cat-eyed snake
Sick.
last year, and it was like it was so fun, and it turned out beautiful. It's a great vivarium. It should outlive me. And it wasn't that hard to do. So it's like, yeah, that's the next step. I think once I get these buildings finished, I might start actually. I kind of want to like outfit the whole building with like almost like built-in vivariums, because I think about a lot of things like how space gets wasted, when we have these rectangular boxes. It's like if you have a room of rectangular boxes, like you lose, at least 4 square feet in every corner. You
Mm.
know what I mean? Of your room. And that's a lot. That's a lot of room that's just that like if you built a vivarium that, like fit into the corner at a 45-degree angle, with the vivarium next to it at another 45-degree angle, you're providing all that floor space for the animals that's otherwise just being wasted.
Mhm.
yeah,
Just things like that.
Or even just like even things like placement in the room. Like it could be cool.
Yeah.
Like I could imagine if I had like if I buy a house in the next 10 years or some shit and I decide I want to get a green tree monitor or something like that, right? I could easily imagine having like an office or wherever where I decide, all right, this is where this enclosure is going to go. And instead of it being a giant box that sits in a corner, maybe it's like a wraparound that sits in the corner of the
Yeah.
ceiling. It goes around the entire fucking room and have
Yeah.
spots where it dips down for access to feeding and stuff like that. Or maybe there are lighting pitches at every corner. That way the animal can have varied basking places and varied, it doesn't have to come back to the same place for one single basking site, right? It could be all over the place. Now, granted, obviously that adds up cost wise and stuff like that, but it's brilliant. It's still fun. It's still like a cool idea to think about, like, man, that'd be really fun to do at some point in life, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, yeah.
have you guys been to any zoos lately, like
Yeah,
zoological facilities?
yeah,
They
yeah.
definitely they've figured out, I think, the space thing, because some of those exhibits, it's like it's just so creative how they come up, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
come up above you. They typically will access them from the back, so they'll have like a back
Mm-hmm.
door that
Yeah.
you're viewing through the front. You can get through the back for maintenance. But yeah, trying to incorporate some of those ideas, I think, would be really cool to have, yeah, built into the wall or something where you can access it from another hallway. So then, you can put a couch right in front of the enclosure. You don't have to have like this huge maintenance corridor, around the front.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're definitely right about zoos. And I'm not trying to speak broadly about everybody, right? There's obviously some people that are doing crazy cool shit, um, with various different animals and orientations and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. But I just think that even I guess, yeah, actually zoos are there are quite a few zoos that do that in a way that's pretty goddamn outstanding. So maybe I should caveat that, but yeah.
Yeah, it's fun to
What
go
comes to
and
mind?
just observe and see how they do,
Yeah,
how they're making use of the different space.
yeah, sure.
Totally.
That's a good point.
Yeah. What comes to mind for me is Cal Academy, the California Academy of Sciences in
Oh
San
yeah.
Francisco is not super far from me. And they, I guess it was probably 15 years ago now, maybe 10 years ago. They reopened, after doing this huge thing, and they have a living roof, and the whole building is like sloped, and it has these two big domes, and one of the domes is a planetarium,
Yeah.
and the other one is just a glass dome it's a rainforest, and so you
Spiral
walk
staircase.
through it on a spiral staircase. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so you start down at the floor, and there's a swamp, and you've got amazing huge arapaima, big fish and stuff like that swimming around down there. But then you're spiraling up, and there are like smaller vivariums displayed along the way. But then you're also in a vivarium the whole time,
Yeah.
and there are birds flying around, and there are butterflies flying around, and they'll come and land on you, and
Yeah.
there are just plants dripping on everything, and
Fun,
that is
fun fact.
that's some good stuff.
The California Academy of Sciences has one of my Uromastics. They,
Really,
yeah, they got one of my Uromastics J. Rye about,
that's awesome.
I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
I
I
love it.
gotta go there sometime and see if it's still around. That'd be
Yeah,
pretty.
dude, you gotta when you come out and visit me, we'll go. It's only an
Oh,
There you go.
hour and a half away. It's not so far.
let's go.
They actually, what they had the still to this day, the thing that has surprised me most seeing on public display in terms of herpetofauna was they have this amazing huge vivarium, and the main species in it is a green anaconda, but they also have maybe, I think they might have a rainbow boa or a boa constrictor in it. But the third thing they had in it, it was it's called an ebony keelback. It's Chironius or Chironius grandis quamis. It's this inky black, huge species of neotropical colubrid, and
Cool.
I've literally never seen one in captivity in North America anywhere other than there, and it was just like, what? Like, I don't e, I'm so curious. Like, I asked someone working there who was like walking, like a docent walking around. I was like, can you tell me anything about that snake? And she's like, oh yeah, so that's a boa. And I was
No,
like,
dude.
okay,
No.
never mind.
Oh no.
But it was really funny because like I'm still to this day, I've actually, the last time I was there, it was no longer there. I guess it's since passed away, but for several years it was there. And I still I'm like, okay, who is the curator of the herpetology section? Because I need to talk. Like, how did they even get it? Like, I want to know. Like, I
Yeah.
feel like it's a story. There must be a story there, like it was a confiscation or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's just such an unusual species, and I don't know of anywhere, and they're definitely
Wow.
not being bred. It's super hard to keep snake, but
Wild.
anyway,
That's a trip.
Got
fun
to
little
take a trip.
anecdote.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. We should all meet up and go there and check it out. That'd be a great
Do
time.
it. There we
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh
West
man.
Coast trip. Yeah. I'm like probably 10 hours from there. Just got to
Yeah.
drive through Oregon and Northern California.
It's
Oh
not so
man.
bad.
Yeah. I don't know. Sounds like I might fly. I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
flight might be easier.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, so okay, so a couple of things. First is we are creeping right up on 2 hours here, which is
Yeah.
awesome. And I am by no means trying to quash the conversation. Although I must admit, I have to wake quite early tomorrow morning to teach some early morning jujitsu. So if it would be okay with both of you gentlemen, we
Yes.
could maybe move towards the close on this one, and with the caveat that it would be awesome to have you back on at some point in the future, Morgan, because this has been an incredibly interesting and fun conversation. I've very much enjoyed this. So
Yeah.
if you're up for it, if that's okay, we'd love to have you back on in the future too.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I could talk about this for days, so definitely would come back. And yeah, thank you guys for inviting me to come this time for sure.
Of course. Well, with
Oh,
that,
it's such a pleasure.
yeah, absolutely. And with that in mind, Roy, do you wanna swing away at the closing
Yeah.
question? We talked a little bit about it already, but still.
Yeah, it's already been alluded to. So the cat's out of the bag, as they say. But yeah, so the question is just why herpetoculture? And um feel free to interpret that however makes sense to you. It could be, why you do it personally. It could also be this is why I think it benefits society. But yeah, why herpetoculture?
Yeah, I think that is a really good question. I've thought a lot about that, and I don't know if I have a real solid answer, but I'll definitely, speak from the heart and stuff. But I think it is honestly like a spiritual pursuit in a way. Like
Yeah.
Mhm.
my spirit gets something from, my soul, or my, like, you know, the definition of me gets something from interacting with these animals. And I don't know, it's very intangible. It's like, it's hard to describe. People who don't have this bug go to, they wouldn't understand it. The
Mhm.
animals aren't doing any work for me. They're not providing me any other tangible outcome other
Mhm.
than, blessing me with their presence, basically, and being willing to live with us. So it's definitely, I think, a spiritual thing for me. Like, on the other side, it's also kind of a scientific thing. Like, I really enjoy the learning aspects and the experimentation and the,
Mm,
tweaking and trying to get and learn better and trying to improve.
mm,
So it's
Mhm.
kind of the challenge. The challenge of it is appealing, and then also, yeah, just that kind of deep connection that I feel with the animals and how they connect me more to the natural world, and connect me to places that I've never been. I've never been to Costa Rica, but I'm learning about, this environment to build this enclosure, and it's just really, really fascinating to kind of combine a bunch of my different interests and hobbies into this one pursuit that,
Mhm.
it's just so enjoyable.
yeah.
That,
Damn.
that's kind of me rambling on, but I think that kind of covers my current feelings about it.
Oh,
Yeah, I
that's an
appreciate that answer a
excellent
lot.
answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
love
thanks
it.
so much for that.
Yeah, and
I
it always is
I
evolving too.
yeah, totally. Yeah, it's always evolving.
Yeah,
I agree that there's something about it that feels like, yeah, a spiritual pursuit.
for sure.
It's
Yeah,
cool to hear it framed that way.
yeah, that's excellent. I love that answer. Honestly, couldn't have said it better myself. Well, epic. That's a great way, I think, to let me hit the end recording on the button.